Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Daylight Talk with the theme, The Nature of Light, Designing with Daylight to Reconnect with Nature. As said before, my name is Karina Mose. I'm Associate Professor here at the Academy, and I'm really delighted to guide you through this Daylight Talk over the next hour, and I hope that you will stay here and join the Q&A session afterwards so we can have a discussion. Our guest speaker is Sinus Lynge, co-founder and creative director of EFFEKT. And in this lecture, I hope, he explores how architecture can frame and enhance our experience of light as a shift throughout the day and throughout the seasons. Drawing on EFFEKT's mission to reconnect people with nature, Sinus shares the studio's daylight strategies as seen in a series of educational and residential projects in Denmark. Through thoughtful design, daylight becomes more than illumination, more than light and space. It also becomes a reminder of our deep connection to nature rhythm. A little bit about you. Sinus Lynge is the co-founder, as mentioned, of EFFEKT, where he has successful bridge research and design across a range of award-winning projects. His holistic and collaborative approach to architecture, urbanism, landscape and research leads to innovative, impactful design solutions that address today's major social and environmental challenges. His work is centered on reconnecting people with nature through design in every scale. His design carefully integrates nature while responding to environmental and human needs. Sinus presents an empathic and responsive approach to architecture dedicated to continuous innovation. He strives to position the architecture as a catalyst for last and positive change. So please welcome Sinus Lynge.
Thank you for that nice introduction, and thank you so much for the invitation to come here and talk about what we have learned about daylight through a series of projects. I come here not only with my own experience, but with the collective experience of our office, EFFEKT Architects. We're a Copenhagen-based studio, and we're on a mission to research, envision, and realize the change that we see is necessary in society. And we do that through projects bridging from architecture to landscape design to urban planning. So we have a quite holistic approach to architecture and design. We're called EFFEKT because it's a Danish word for impact, so we wanted to use our practice as a kind of investigation of the impact that you can have through design. And as such, we see design and architecture and urban planning as the means to an end. So with every project, we set agendas and targets of what we want to achieve. And in that sense, we work both with social, environmental and economic impact. We started out 20 years ago with the main focus on the social and cultural sort of change potential in architecture and urbanism. But around 10 years ago, we sort of bumped into this chart describing what is called the Great Acceleration. Do you know this chart already? This is on the one side, you can see the socio-economic trends of modern society, and on the other side here, you see the ecological impact. And this is looking at the impact over the last 250 years. So to kind of break it down, this is the growth in global population, energy consumption, also exponential growth following the water usage, air trips in that same period, deforestation happening in the same period, species going extinct, also exponential curve, concentration of atmospheric CO2, and then global warming. So when you have all these curves on top of each other, you see this quite frightening portrait of our age, which has been dubbed the Great Acceleration. It kind of starts off in the Industrial Revolution, but it's basically in the last 50 years, in my entire lifetime, that this has taken off and started to become this sort of exponential movement. And we, our generation, your generation too, we find ourselves up here at this peak. So when we saw this, we decided that we need to be a company and a practice that will help bring back the sort of balance between human development, human society, human well-being, and the natural world that we are a part of. And that, we think, is the sort of greatest design challenge for architects of our generation. We try to coin it with this diagram explaining this as a kind of, in a simple way, going from ego to eco. So this describes the movement away from a sort of human-centric worldview to a sort of eco-centric perspective, where with David Attenborough's word, this is like seeing people apart from nature, and this is seeing people and humans as being a part of nature. That sounds simple, and I guess we all kind of can understand that on a high level sort of way, but once you start thinking about being a part of ecosystems and that all the human and man-made environments are also embedded and parts of ecosystem, this is a huge transition that I think is the task of the century, of understanding how buildings, how cities and infrastructures that we build and create, how they are part of nature, and how we make sure that they are sort of working in harmony with nature. So this is the big agenda in our office, and I guess the biggest task at hand for architecture worldwide. And I'm saying that because I do think that architecture is the practice where we shape the relationship between us humans and the natural environment that we are part of. That is the practice of architecture, both in a sort of material way, the way we harvest and use and get rid of materials, but also on a sort of huge scale. If you look at the sort of global relation, we also now know that architecture and the built environment is responsible for a lot of the emission, a lot of the negative footprint on biodiversity. So we have a huge, very important relation between architecture and the sort of big scale planetary systems. But also on the human scale, the way that our buildings enable us to relate to nature on the outside, the way that we integrate nature into our cities. And then on the sort of micro scale of sort of the smallest entities. And just as a few examples that has been kind of mind-blowing to me of how these sort of close relations between humans and nature are, we consider reconnecting this nature is something that happens through air, through fresh air, for instance. Each of us breathe in 11,000 liters of air every day, of which 550 are oxygen that is directly incorporated into our bodies and used in our systems. So the air that we breathe is a place where we're like extremely connected to the natural environment, because all the oxygen that we breathe is something that was created by the plants around us. And you all know how dependent we are on that sort of breath that we take every second. And knowing this, it's also sort of a mind-blowing fact that we spend 95% of our time indoors, and the indoor air quality is 3 times as bad as what we see outside in the city. So there's a huge work to ensure that the indoor air quality is better. It's also through food. I mean, we are all depending on the food that we ate this morning to keep up our energy levels. And all that food is sort of produced with sunlight through photosynthesis, whether we ate cereals or meat or whatever it is, still everything that we digest is produced by sunlight and plants that turn sunlight into sugars. And that also means that our bodies and cells are replaced with new ones every 7 years. So we are basically in a sort of ongoing material exchange with our surroundings. These are just a few examples of these kind of micro levels of which we are like insanely closely connected with nature. Water that makes up 70% of our body comes from the oceans, evaporates through clouds, falls like rains, and is kind of stored in depots. In Denmark, at least, it's hundreds of years old. The water that we bring up from ground. Again, if we go into the very micro level, roughly 57% of our cells are microorganisms that are made up by microbiome. So only 43% of our cells are actually human. So we are ourselves walking ecosystems. Well, this is just a small detour to kind of discuss all the levels in which we are closely connected with nature. Today we are talking about light, and light is also an extremely important way that we connect with nature. It's our main source of information. So about the environment. So 80 to 90% of our sensory data is processed, that we process in our brain comes from the sight. So it's our main way to take in space and orientate ourselves in the surroundings. And when we look at things, we recall and interpret all and activate all the senses that we have used. We know already how it would feel like if you bite in a piece of wood, even though we don't do it, you have that feeling of how it feels to touch wood, or when something feels warm, we can interpret all that through light. So daylight is something that is enormously important to architecture. I think daylight to architecture is like what water is to a fish. And it also is responsible for a lot of processes inside our body. So through the daylight that we experience, we set the pace of the day. It tells us when hormones should be produced, when we should go to bed, and when we should be fresh and everything else. So it's enormously important to human well-being. Today I'm going to talk about 4 projects in which we have worked specifically around daylight that are in part shaped by daylight studies, and that I think has taught us about how to work with daylight. They're all built projects that you can visit in Denmark, so they're not too far off. One is even right next to us in Copenhagen. But the first one I will tell you about is a project called Living Places that was a pilot project developed in a partnership through VELUX, Artelia and EFFEKT, with VELUX as the client. It was a small investigation of how, this was built in Jernbanebyen in Copenhagen, and it was a project that was there for 2 years. It has now been disassembled and is being put up in 2 new places in Denmark. And this project started out with the sort of task of seeing how human health and sort of planetary health could go hand in hand to create buildings that were actually supporting health both for human and for the planet. I think when we have talked about this project earlier, we have been mostly focusing on the technical aspect of limiting CO2 emissions, where we wanted to achieve a huge reduction in the emissions from the building. We started by investigating and benchmarking CO2 levels from a traditional building, looking at the sort of operational period of use of a house. So this is the energy use of the house, and we found out actually that most of the emissions happens in the sort of early phases during the production and the sort of end of life of buildings. So what we did was to develop a building that was almost entirely based on bio-based materials that sequester and store CO2 throughout the whole period and lifetime of the building. So at the end of a 50 years use period, you are still at a net zero before you then kind of here, you calculate that you then burn off the house and all the stored CO2 is evaporated. We did design this project for disassembly so that it will be a long time before the CO2 is emitted. But when you compare that to a normal house, we could see that we could actually, just with using solutions that we already have, we can reduce CO2 emissions by 2/3, only using natural materials and materials that are already on the market. So this was a task of doing a lot of technical design, looking at all the components and designing this project with bio-based material for disassembly. And we did achieve a quite low CO2 emission, but what we also achieved was a sort of first-class indoor environment. And that was actually the way that the project was designed. It was designed from a study into light. So from the outside, we studied like almost all types of roof profiles to come to this idea with this sloped roof that actually is sloping over multiple stories, because it allows a lot of sunlight to come down to the spaces in between and giving you a sort of human scale between the houses. So actually getting a lot of light into the facades of the houses, and at the same time looking from an interior perspective, allowing quite deep buildings with a lot of sunlight to come in through facades, but also from roof lights. So it was actually the daylight profile that gave the shape to the buildings in this project. And then we did measure the indoor qualities from sort of the daylight, the thermal environment, indoor air quality, acoustics, but also the felt connection to the outside. So two of these parameters are actually entirely related to daylight. And the design of where the windows were put was sort of designed from a perspective of giving a lot of analysis to how to make a robust typology that would have plenty of daylight coming in through windows. So we made more than 50 simulations of different sort of window types and locations and ways of programming the building to ensure that it was super robust in terms of daylight quality. I'll show you how it looks from the inside in a moment. But that resulted in this prototype village with 5 houses, 2 of them created as sort of new homes. And here you can see the sort of effect of the sloped roof, where you have these actually 3-story buildings. They kind of appear to be smaller when you see them, but they have quite a big, like people experience when they come inside, that they're kind of bigger on the outside, on the inside than on the outside. And I think it's because of the roof form. And this is how it looks from the outside. You can see a few of the roof windows here. And once you're inside, we worked with these slightly higher ceilings, so you have super nice daylight conditions on the inside, with quite few and very strategically located windows that are used for specific relations. So one window was a kind of sitting niche where you could look out into the garden. Another one was for the kitchen. Another one was the sort of top light for the kitchen, taking in a lot of light deep into the building. And the result is that you have these spaces that just feel insanely friendly. And we did create these rooms so they also had different sort of daylight conditions. And even though they have the same materials, they have quite a differentiated ambient when you walk through this sort of rather small house. This is the other house that was entirely made in in CLT, so it has a wooden interior, but the same cutouts for windows. So here's a small video showing you some of the light moments of this project. Because what you experience when you do a project that is so centered around daylight is that it's actually different. The building is different in the morning than in the afternoon. And I think that was a kind of a richness that we ourselves discovered when coming to this house at different times, showing people around and even staying and living in the building for a period of time. And as an architect, you actually rarely get that opportunity to, because usually when you're done with a house, it's kind of given to your clients and you don't have the opportunity to come back. And here we had the opportunity to document how the light was moving across the day, which is a quite big quality in a space that makes the indoor spaces into really nice experiences of sunlight and the time of day. So that was living places. The buildings, the two buildings, or all the 5 buildings are still possible to visit. So 3 of them are now in Middelfart in a housing exposition here, and 2 of them are in Østbirk, just outside of Aarhus. So they have left Copenhagen, but you can still go and see them if you want. The next project is a sort of slightly larger project that we have developed together with our good collaborators from CF Møller. It's an educational building in Svendborg, SIMAC. It's Svendborg International Maritime Academy, which was won in a competition. So it's also not far from Copenhagen. It's a project that is a huge new institution in Svendborg, and it's used partly to activate a post-industrial harborfront. So it was a very important point in this project that it should be kind of using the school to create more life and activity on this old harborfront. So in that sense, the connection between indoors and outdoors in this project was key to the design and key to the client and the school. So we kind of conceived the whole project as something that would be seamlessly going from inside to outside. So the urban space would actually flow through the building and the building should kind of mix with the urban space. We tried to make this building in a way that it related to the harbor and to the structures that we could see on the harbor already. So this sort of concrete grid, space grid that we did was a kind of reference to the existing buildings already there on the harbor front. So the design was actually rather simple, or at least the principles were. We wanted to have a very simple sort of spatial grid system, and then we sort of carved away corners, giving back space to the city that were covered, that start sort of interweaving the city and the indoor of the school, making a big atrium in the center, and then the sort of main plazas up through the building inside this grid. So this is like, that was a very, very simple sketch that we tried to realize. And as you can see here, this is a visualization from the competition, and this is a construction site image that I took when we just had the sort of space structure elevated. And you can see how the daylight is kind of blowing in from all sides here. So the idea here was actually to use the transparency and the sort of light coming through all facades as a connector between the outdoors and the indoors, basically making the indoor of the building feel like an urban space, an urban plaza, and also making the sort of connection stronger. So this was actually the academy as it looked before. It was a lot of small spaces and workshops all across town that we tried to take the same sort of environment and then sort of connect it inside the building around this big atrium. And that was the big sort of change for the school, that they suddenly had a school where you could see all the other students, you could see into all the workshops. Suddenly you have a visual connection between the different spaces, but also from the school to the city. So this sort of transparency where you can't really tell when you have the glass facades between the harbor and the auditorium and the sort of front space and the big atrium was the kind of the target of this project, to make this a sort of a spatial frame where you have all this life taking place. This is a look into the canteen and some workspaces up over that. Here you're looking up through the space grid to the skylights, taking down a lot of daylight into the heart of the building. So it makes this kind of inner space appear a little bit like an outdoor courtyard. And then you have a lot of activity zones, like semi-public, you could say, around this atrium, which is the more shared transition areas where you can have sort of breakout sessions and work, and you can look into the bigger spaces like the auditorium that is here between the harbor and the atrium, with the water on one side and the atrium in the other side. Or into the workshops where you can see all the old equipment still in place, but now in a solution where you can actually see what happens inside these workshops, all the really fun activities. And these are sort of some of the smaller workshops. You also have like huge diesel engines in the lower ground that are here, where the building actually opens up like a workshop, and you can take big items out on the waterfront. So here you can see how the building is starting to open up towards the city. And some of these sort of areas are also kind of outside spaces for the school. This is the back side where you can see some of the sort of more technical entrances and the entrance towards the city. And the transparency of the building, where you can actually see through the corner here, literally, but also through the glass corner. It becomes this kind of structure that in the night it turns into almost like a lamp, lighting up the city. So that is a kind of study on how to use light and space to create this transparency as a connection between the building and the city. Now the next project was also a project that was actually shaped by the direct work with the daylight. So this is a student housing, micro-living in Frederiksberg. It's right on Å Boulevarden in the center of Copenhagen. You may have seen it. It's been dubbed accordion houses because it looks like an accordion. And it's 700 units, so it's a lot of homes here, sort of weaved into to the heart of Frederiksberg. This project, like the other one, also started as a kind of urban plan in which we were asked by the city and the plot owner and different stakeholders to help create a plan with a school and a new sports hall, a lot of sort of transformation of existing projects, a new park, a new sort of passage for bikes, and then these quite large program of 700 units for young people with kind of co-living, but in quite small spaces. So it's a super tricky master plan exercise where we started with all the public spaces and tried to make space for this quite big program of youth housing. That was the ambition, to get in here. And we wanted to make the youth housing serve as a kind of wall towards the big road here, with getting sunlight and sort of quiet around the school and the park in the center, which was successful, but it did demand a certain capacity on the youth housing, because in order to get all these homes here, we needed to do sort of one-sided units. And to do that, you need to have, because here they were facing the road and also a northeastern facade, so it was very difficult to get really nice daylight conditions into these units. So while the lower part is a super public function with the shops and shared amenities all on the ground floor facing out, once you're further up in the building, it's actually a lot of smaller units with one-sided access. And the way we dealt with that and the way we got the sort of allowance to build this was actually by changing the facade design. So the whole facade is designed with bay windows. So every unit has a bay window that enables light to come in from two sides, and it creates a completely different light quality inside these rather small units. So if you have kind of northeast up here, you can see the sun has the opportunity to come deep into to the building because the window is facing the sun, and it creates this sort of front of the unit where you can see in two directions and get this quite open quality at the end of a rather small unit. At the same time, we needed to get fresh air into the apartment without taking the noise in. So the lower part of this bay window was created as a kind of noise reducing ventilation. So when you see this place here, this is both a bench in which you can sit and look out on the city, but it's also the ventilation where you can get fresh air in without getting the noise from the street. So you have these quiet rooms with super nice view over Copenhagen and two-sided windows. But that created this really unique facade, which is something that only came up because out of necessity for creating these daylight conditions. And that became sort of the iconic part of the building. So the facade was actually a response to daylight demands. Also, of course, a response to the existing environment of these rounded brick buildings from last century that we tried to sort of meet in the way that the architecture meets the surrounding city. Then on the top you have the roof gardens with plenty of daylight and view over the entire city. And on the lower part you have all these access points and the public functions and shared functions of the units. And then in the ground floor you have higher units, so they have a sort of split level in one side, and then very high windows with a lot of light coming in. And once you're up in the buildings, you have these spaces that are really, really appreciated by the students, where they can sit and study and look out on the city. So that's a big project that is where the facade is entirely shaped by the work that we did with daylight. So the last project I have is a quite different type of architecture. It's architecture without a facade. So whilst the three other projects were working with the sort of agenda of making the inside a little bit more like the outside or the outdoors, this is a project that is in fact entirely outdoors. And when you ask people to close their eyes and think of a nice place that they recall, they often think about a place in nature. And this was one of the opportunities we've had in our company of doing architecture that is kind of fully integrated and weaved into nature. This was a project for a forest tower. It's just south of Copenhagen, near Haslev in Rønnede, where we were tasked to do a sort of viewpoint in a forest that already had some activities, rope climbing in the trees. And one of the demands for doing this was to make sure that the many new visitors that would come into this protected forest would not run all over the place. So the entire project was done as a kind of pathway that would keep the footfall out of the forest, so you don't have people walking on the new trees and sprouts that grow up. So you have now 300,000 people every year walking on this line, and they're very disciplined. Only kids and dogs run off this. Most people will just stay on that small boardwalk. So it does work. And when you walk here through the forest, you have about a kilometer or so before to kind of fall into the pace of the forest. And you're walking under this tall ceiling of the canopy. And then you arrive at the tower, and it kind of blends in a little bit with the forest, even though the columns are slightly different color. When you get closer, you can see this sort of man-made structure, of course. But what then happens is then you get into the tower, and you're in this kind of cathedral-like space under the tower, where you do have a lot of daylight, but when it's summer and you have the canopy here, it actually feels like a big sort of rather closed space, and it feels dark because you have the canopy closing the daylight from coming in. In the middle of this, we managed to keep a few trees, so when you look up the hole in the middle of the tower, you do see up here, but you have trees in that space. And then you start the climb up through the 600 meters pathway, and it begins with being sort of inside the forest, so it still sort of rather feels rather dark relatively. And then at some point you rise over the canopy, and suddenly you have this moment of, it feels a little bit sort of transformative when you come above the canopy, and suddenly you have a completely different light, and you start overlooking the forest. And then you walk through the structure of the tower, and then suddenly you can look inside the tower, and then you have this ball on the inside where you can see other people walking on the inside, and then you arrive at the top, and suddenly you have this 360 view of the landscape, but also the whole sky above you, and you're sort of in full light. And that experience is quite amazing. It's just a piece of architecture, but what it actually does is that it brings you from the floor of the forest up through the canopy and above, and then because we have such a flat land, you can see the whole horizon. Sometimes you can see to Sweden, and that experience is a sort of experience of moving through layers of space up to the sky, where you have this full light experience. And it is quite. It was, even for us who had been working for years on this design, it was a surprise to make this walk, and I still go there every year with my family because I just like to go through the canopy. So it's basically it's a way of having a sort of an experience with nature. But I think it's a nice example of a project that is sort of enabling you to 100% be in nature and experience. If you come at different times a day or different times a year, you have completely different experiences of the colors and the light, and this because you are outside. And at the end of the day, that's probably the best way to experience daylight, is like being more outside and being more in nature. And that's what this project is about, and what it has been. I think it's a luxury as an architect to be able and to be allowed to work with architecture that is, in that sense, interweaving completely with nature, interweaving completely with the forest, the trees, and with the sort of fresh air coming through the structure, and with the light and the shadows that actually creates this space, and also the spaces where there's no structure and no tower. The sort of void in the middle is a quite important part of this experience. So in that sense, I think this is probably the most sort of direct way of working with daylight and space and structure, which you are rarely allowed to do when you work with traditional buildings, where there are all sorts of technical demands and how big the windows can be and the thickness of the glass and so forth. So I think this is a beautiful example of working with the sort of quality and the value of daylight and the quality of being outside. So that concludes the sort of daylight experiences that I wanted to share with you today. And now it's time for Q&A.
Thank you so much. Do you have any questions, or do you want to have a little bit more detailed explanation of some of the words today? Yeah.
I have a question. We've seen a lot of daylight in relation to geometry, I think. Do you have any considerations for different materialities in daylight? I mean, some of them, you know, heat up when the sun is shining on them. Some of them, you know, reflect. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think what I said in the beginning, that I think daylight to architecture is a little bit like the water to a fish. So the way that you experience materials is so related to your memory of materials and how they are described with light. And I think if you look at the project Living Places, for instance, I think the sun on these wooden panels is something that is just resonating very deep with people when they come in. We had like people coming in and said, "This feels like I'm getting a hawk in a forest," which is like, it's pretty cool when you do a house that then has that sort of impact on people, and that's the combination of the sort of indoor climate, the acoustics, but also the material and the light. So in that sense, I think that it's like thinking about what we have learned about daylight in these projects. It's so much about materiality and how light is actually bringing forth the quality of different materials. I also think the project in Svendborg with these concrete, with the concrete structure that is kind of have very quite sharp corners, and that structure becomes extremely crisp because of the way that the light describes the structure. So I think there's such a close relation between material and light that is almost difficult to separate it mentally. And I think that's also the case when you see this round corrugated iron columns. The way that they are described by light is also something that is speaking to some very deep experiences with material that everybody has kind of ready. You are just kind of prepared to have that experience as a human being because you spent your childhood feeling the warmth of wood or the coldness of steel or the hardness of stone. And I think that's something that we can work with through light as well.
I have a question to the ventilation in your housing project, the Cordion. Is it natural ventilation and is it filtered?
It's filtered ventilation, the one that you get in. You can also open with the window, but if you do that in the wrong times of day, you will have a lot of noise as well. So this is a way to ensure that you can get fresh air and ventilation also when you don't want to open the window because of the noise outside. So it does have the combination of kind of natural and mechanical ventilation.
I would like to ask you a little bit about atmosphere and light, because two examples you have shown, Living Places and SIMAC, is really different atmospherical. And So when you talk about this hug you feel when you come into living places, houses, and the crispiness of a SIMAC building. So when you discuss the daylight, what do we want to do with the daylight in this building? How do you address the atmosphere or of the building?
Well, I think one of the things we wanted to achieve with the SIMAC project was to have this kind of central part where you get the filtered daylight from the top. And that creates, because it's still kind of the temperature is kind of indoor temperature, but you feel like you come into an outdoor space, like coming into a patio in Italy, or sort of this kind of compressed space where you have plenty of daylight. So we wanted that also to be a very comfortable space, even though the materials are slightly harder than what you experience in living places where it's completely wooden. So I think you can still create this kind of nice and cozy. It feels cozy, the atmosphere, also in SIMAC, even though the light is harder and brighter, and the materials are a little bit harder as well. And that has a lot to do also with the acoustics and with the sort of temperature and comfort that you feel there.
How do you deal with the acoustics in the SIMAC building?
Well, there's a lot of acoustic panels.
Okay.
It's a big acoustic project.
So, because it's very hard surfaces you work with there.
Yeah. But it does feel quite calm and intimate. And I think sometimes you forget that intimacy is also something that is created a lot by the acoustics.
So we talk a lot about here at the Academy that the functionality of what use should this space be or service or facilitate. So when I saw the SIMAC project, for me it's very industrial and perhaps support what they actually are doing there. So do we have that kind of discussion in the EFFEKT and when you create? So how the architecture through the atmosphere or through the materiality and the form support the actually function that should be there. The difference between dwelling or a school for it's for the sea.
It's maritime.
Yeah, maritime. Yeah.
I think it was specifically complicated with the SIMAC because it combines some really big workshops where you have huge diesel engines that should be running, moving gigantic ships. That's what they are. They're taught as kind of mechanics to fix these engines. So you have this huge old diesel engine, and you can imagine the exhaust and the sound and the vibrations created by such an engine that the students should be able to work with. So that had to be put in the sort of base of the building, but it also, some of the workshops further up demanded floors that would take vibrations and big loads, and also acoustic protection inside. So some of the glasses also have acoustic protection. So that was a rather complicated task, but what we wanted with that building was that it would feel okay to come into that building with a blue collar, because a lot of the students there, they work with their hands, they have oil and they're dirty, they weld together things, and they have like workshops. And then in other parts of the building you have people that would study modern navigation or logistics, which is like super high-tech disciplines. So that building has to kind of cope with all these different disciplines, like you do on a ship. And we wanted it to be like...
So it's actually a machine itself?
It is very much a machine itself. I mean, the the head of the school were extremely happy about the exposed ventilation because we can work on them. And so they wanted the whole building to be like a big ship where all the students could be working with simulations and real constructions in the building.
So do you have something more? Yeah.
Again, with the school in Svendborg,
Yeah.
what was the thoughts like about the materials? I know you said something about like it was very important to make it transparent and that you were able to see through the building, but the materials that was used was perhaps not the most environmentally friendly, thinking about concrete and glass. Did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, we did, and we actually, I mean, along the way, we actually wanted to change the structure to a wooden structure, but at the time in the project, we were going through huge savings, so this was just not on the table. So this sort of knowledge about the transition and the footprints of materials and the impact of, say, concrete and glass was something that actually came to us during the kind of process of creating that project. So in that sense, you sometimes have this feeling as an architect that your projects are spanning so many years that you are sometimes working a little bit with agendas that are already a few years old. And I think what we learn right now about the environmental impacts of buildings is moving so fast that some decisions are already old when the building is done. On the other hand, I also think that it's ended up being a building that was like really speaking to this industrial harborfront and the materials and the atmosphere and the sort of rawness of that area. So from an aesthetic perspective, I think it was still extremely successful to kind of stick to the guns and make a project that was actually worked and developed and realized in this concrete structure that you see all these old industrial buildings on the harbor. They're built like that.
Yeah. Do you want to ask further? Can I ask one more?
Of course.
Because we are also a school very close to the water, and it actually affects the feeling of being here, that we can have the daylight reflected on the water and see reflected in the ceiling again. And I think that when you have this very close to water, you actually have skylight from both sides. So when you calculated the daylight factor as you were supposed to do in that, did you work with that, or was it just from the sky? This is a little bit nerdy.
Yeah, but I think the reflection from the water was kind of an extra. But what we did experience in that project was that we had overwhelming amounts of light coming in through the structure. So what we were working with was what amounts of shading panels and shading devices did we need to also create to not be sort of overwhelmed with the daylight.
Yeah, daylight glare is actually also a problem.
Yeah. And that was the biggest issue in that building, being an educational buildings, was the sort of very strict demands for the indoor quality of not having glare or too much light, and the exact right temperature in all the sort of educational spaces.
So you actually have to deal with all the climate issues, overheating, too much daylight, and at the other hand also daylight when there's not enough of it. And even flooding, because the harbor of Svendborg is known to sometimes be flooded. So the whole ground floor is created so that it could take a flooding incident without getting too much harmed by it. Super interesting. Yeah. Almost a boat. It's not floating, but it's floating. Able to take
it's a kind of a boat on land. Yeah.
Okay. If there's no more questions, I will say thank you so much to you for lecture and being here. Thank you for you to be a part of the daylight talk. And just to wrap it up, we can give a hand now.
Thank you.